When people hear my name, they expect me to talk about stocks, valuations, cash flows, and the decisions CEOs make when they sit across from me. They don't expect me to talk about gas stations. But the truth is simple. Wealth is not destroyed by one big mistake. It's usually lost a little bit at a time through decisions that feel small, harmless, and routine. And in America, one of the most consistent invisible drains on household wealth happens every time someone pulls up to a pump. I've spent my entire life studying how money moves, how it grows, how it leaks, how it silently disappears. And when you zoom out far enough, you see that the average family doesn't go broke because of one catastrophic event. They go broke because of habits, patterns, and choices that quietly chip away at their financial base. Your gas station habits are one of those patterns. Most people never question them, but the consequences accumulate whether you pay attention or not. I didn't fully appreciate this myself until I saw the long-term cost curves associated with engine maintenance, fuel inefficiency, credit card interest, and what behavioral economists like to call small purchase impulsivity. But once you see the math, it becomes impossible to unsee it. What looks like a 3-cent or 5-cent difference at the pump adds up to hundreds, sometimes thousands over time, not only in fuel, but in engine performance, long-term repair bills, and a style of spending that bleeds into the rest of your financial life. Let me clarify something from the start. I'm not here to accuse any specific brand of harming engines or to claim that certain gas stations are inherently bad. I don't deal in sensationalism. What I deal in is evidence, incentives, and patterns that show up across the population over decades. And the data is clear enough to say this confidently. If you don't understand how fuel quality, engine deposits, payment methods, and purchasing habits interact, you're losing money in ways you don't see. One of the most interesting pieces of information I encountered comes from AAA, a group known for being conservative with their findings. Their testing showed that gasoline with lower detergent standards can lead to dramatically more engine deposits than higher standard fuel. They didn't say this will destroy your engine. They didn't say this is a disaster waiting to happen. They simply demonstrated that lower quality fuel tends to leave more residue, and residue affects performance, efficiency, and long-term maintenance. When you stretch that effect over the lifespan of a car, the numbers start to matter, especially for families already squeezed by rising insurance, food costs, and interest rates. This is where personal finance intersects with everyday life in a way most people overlook. If your engine becomes less efficient because of deposits, you burn more fuel over thousands of miles. If the vehicle eventually needs a professional cleaning or develops performance issues, you absorb the cost. If you pay for gas with a credit card that carries a balance, you're not just paying for fuel, you're paying interest on fuel, and the interest often exceeds whatever savings you thought you were getting by choosing the cheapest station. When I say your gas station choices slowly eat your wealth, I'm not speaking dramatically. I'm describing how money evaporates when small decisions compound over years. People understand compounding on the upside, how investments grow when you leave them untouched. But they rarely understand compounding on the downside. Losses compound too. Small inefficiencies compound. Poor fuel efficiency compounds. Interest on revolving credit card balances compounds. Bad maintenance habits compound. And before you know it, you've leaked more wealth than you realize. I've always believed that the way someone behaves with small amounts of money reveals how they'll manage large amounts. This isn't about gas. It's about discipline and awareness. When you pick a gas station solely based on the number on the sign, without thinking about the quality of the product or the long-term implications, you're training yourself to focus only on surface-level savings. That mindset is expensive. It's the same mindset that leads people to buy cheap appliances that break quickly, cheap insurance policies that exclude meaningful coverage, or cheap financial advice that costs far more in the long run. Fuel quality is a perfect example of why the cheapest choice isn't always the best choice. Now, let me be very clear. I'm not suggesting that premium fuel is necessary if your vehicle doesn't require it. That's another way people waste money. I'm talking specifically about the detergents and additives that keep engines clean. In the United States, there's a baseline standard set by regulators, but it's a low minimum. Some brands voluntarily exceed that minimum by using better detergent standards. That doesn't mean their fuel is magical. It just means they're choosing to invest slightly more in the formula, and the long-term difference shows up in the lab and on the road.
I've studied consumer psychology long enough to know that people respond strongly to immediate savings, even if they undermine long-term outcomes.
That's why gas stations with the cheapest prices attract people who don't consider the hidden costs. And hidden costs are where the real damage happens. You don't lose wealth in one blow. You lose it $10 at a time. You lose it in slightly reduced miles per gallon. You lose it in engine inefficiency that you don't even notice until the car feels different. And by then, the deposits have built up enough to matter. You lose it every time you buy overpriced drinks or snacks at the pump, because the business model of many gas stations depends less on fuel profit and more on impulse purchases. You also lose it through financing.
Gas stations are one of the biggest hotspots for credit card creep, the phenomenon where people use high APR cards for small everyday purchases, accumulate a balance,
and end up paying interest on items that should have been consumed and forgotten. I've seen countless household budgets where the credit card balance isn't from vacations or large electronics. It's from groceries, fuel, coffee, and small recurring expenses that balloon over time when interest compounds against the consumer. That's why I always tell people the cost of a product is never just the price tag. The cost is the long-term financial effect of buying it. If you're buying something the wrong way, at the wrong place, for the wrong reasons, you can turn even the cheapest product into the most expensive decision. Gas stations illustrate this perfectly because the price is displayed publicly and prominently, so people believe they're making rational decisions based on transparency. But the real cost is hidden. It's in maintenance, efficiency, interest payments, and habits that spill into other areas of life. I've also noticed something else. People often buy premium fuel because they think it's better, even when their manufacturer explicitly states that regular is acceptable. And this is another quiet way money disappears. You don't gain performance. You don't protect your engine in a meaningful way. You just pay more for something the car doesn't need. This is a lesson in reading instructions, literally. Wealth often grows out of paying attention to things most people ignore. When you combine all these factors, the conclusion becomes obvious. Your gas station choices reflect the way you process financial information, evaluate trade-offs, and prioritize long-term outcomes over immediate gratification. You're not choosing fuel. You're choosing a habit, and habits shape your destiny far more than you realize. The average American spends a smaller share of their income on gasoline today than in previous decades, but the psychological weight of paying for gas feels heavier because other expenses have grown so aggressively. Housing, healthcare, food, and insurance consume a bigger and bigger share of disposable income. When everything else feels more expensive, people fixate on saving pennies at the pump. They're not wrong to want to save money. Every dollar matters, but they often chase the wrong savings. A strategy built on chasing the lowest sticker price is a strategy that eventually fails.
A strategy built on understanding value, quality, long-term cost, and disciplined spending is a strategy that compounds favorably across a lifetime.
That's why I'm talking about gas stations. Not because fuel itself will make or break your financial future, but because your behavior at the pump is a microcosm of your relationship with money. I've spent decades telling people that the key to wealth is avoiding dumb mistakes. You don't need brilliance to succeed. You need consistency, patience, rationality, and a refusal to sabotage yourself. Gas station choices, for many families, are a small but persistent form of self-sabotage. Not intentionally, not dramatically, but quietly. Wealth dies quietly. If I could give every American one piece of advice about gas stations, it wouldn't be always buy from this brand or never buy from that one. It would be understand the cost structure behind your decisions. Understand how small efficiencies translate into long-term savings. Understand that the cheapest option sometimes carries hidden expenses, and the most expensive option sometimes offers no additional value. Understanding is always the first step toward wealth. When I look at the financial habits of most Americans, I see a pattern that repeats over and over again. People underestimate the long-term consequences of small inefficiencies. They underestimate how much a car loses value when the engine becomes less efficient. They underestimate how much interest accumulates on ordinary purchases. They underestimate how much of their paycheck disappears, not through one major expense, but through dozens of minor ones that go unquestioned. Gas stations are just one example, but they're one of the cleanest examples because the pattern is so visible to an investor like me. Let me take you deeper into the psychology behind this. Human beings respond more strongly to immediate savings than long-term value. They'll drive across town to save 10 cents a gallon, even if the detour costs them more than they save. They'll choose the cheapest station, even when the long-term cost of that decision exceeds the short-term benefit. They'll buy a soda or snack at the counter because they feel like they deserve it after saving a little on the price of gas. And they'll swipe a high-interest credit card to pay for it all because the bill doesn't come until next month. This is the perfect recipe for wealth erosion. Not catastrophic wealth destruction, just slow erosion. Just like rust, it doesn't take your car in a day. It takes it inch by inch. And because the damage is gradual, people overlook it. They don't feel poorer immediately, but the financial friction accumulates until it becomes a meaningful drag on their overall well-being. I have watched people lose hundreds of dollars a year due to nothing more than paying for daily expenses with credit cards they don't pay off. Gas station purchases contribute heavily to this because fuel is often bought when people are stressed, tired, rushing to work, or heading home from a long day. Decisions made during low-energy moments tend to be reactive, not deliberate, and reactive spending is almost always expensive spending. The average American has more debt tied to day-to-day consumption than they realize. If you charge $60 of gas per week to a card with high interest and carry that balance, you don't just pay for the fuel, you pay for the fuel plus the interest on the fuel, plus the interest on everything else sitting behind that fuel on the balance. When you ignore the implications of interest, every dollar spent becomes a dollar and some extra. You're not paying $60. You're paying $60 plus however long that $60 stays on the card. And when consumers fall into a habit of rolling balances month after month, that cost becomes invisible but very real. People think the problem is the price of the fuel. It rarely is. The problem is the system of habits around the purchase. Now let's talk about vehicle efficiency. As I mentioned in part one of the most reliable findings in the auto industry is that low-quality fuel can increase engine deposits. Again, I'm not naming brands or accusing anyone of wrongdoing. Quality varies, and many companies voluntarily exceed the minimum regulatory detergent standards. But we know that lower detergent levels correlate with higher deposits, and deposits reduce efficiency. Reduced efficiency is essentially a tax, a quiet tax, a tax that most people never see because it hides in an extra trip to the gas station every month or a subtle decline in the miles per gallon sticker they once took pride in. People don't notice efficiency losses because cars degrade slowly. They don't wake up one morning with the engine running dramatically worse. It happens mile by mile, and because the change is gradual, people adapt to it without realizing that the fuel they've been choosing has been contributing to the problem. If you lose just a few miles per tank because of deposits, you're losing money every time you drive. Multiply that across 10, 15, or 20 years of owning a car, and the financial difference becomes substantial. It's not theoretical, it's arithmetic. I've lived long enough to see two types of people: those who understand that small decisions compound, and those who think only big decisions matter. The second group rarely builds wealth. The first group almost always does. Let me give you another angle. Gas stations are built on a model where fuel is the magnet but not the profit center. Convenience store purchases often carry disproportionate margins. Companies that run these stores understand consumer psychology better than consumers understand themselves. The moment you step inside, the setting is engineered to monetize distraction. Products are positioned at the register for a reason. Prices are higher than supermarkets for a reason. You're supposed to feel like grabbing something extra because you're already spending money and you're already in a mental state that accepts the idea of consumption. Once again, this isn't about the product itself, it's about the behavior. If you buy something overpriced every time you fuel your car, you're not buying food or drinks. You're buying a financial leak. A leak that repeats itself week after week. Habits like this create spirals. When you're used to spending impulsively at small amounts, it becomes easier to justify spending impulsively at larger amounts. When you convince yourself that small costs don't matter, you start to treat money as something that slips through your fingers instead of something you deliberately command. That mindset, not the gas station, is what eventually eats your wealth. Now, I want to discuss something that very few people connect to gas station spending: the emotional component. Every financial decision involves emotion, but fuel decisions are particularly emotionally loaded because they are tied to work, time, mobility, independence, and stress. When people are rushed, late, or exhausted, their ability to make rational financial decisions weakens. Marketers know this. Retailers know this. Banks know this. And the credit card industry benefits enormously from reactive spending. I once spoke with an economist who studied consumer microbehavior around fuel purchases. His findings were simple. People are more likely to make irrational purchases at gas stations when they are emotionally depleted. In other words, when your mind is elsewhere, your wallet opens more easily. That should concern you, not because gas stations are predatory, but because you are vulnerable in moments you don't even realize you're vulnerable. The price of that vulnerability is not measured at the pump. It is measured in cumulative decisions that leave you poor without any single decision feeling wrong in the moment. Let's bring this back to the broader financial picture of the country. And it's true that Americans today spend a smaller percentage of their income on gasoline compared to past decades. But that doesn't change the psychological burden people feel when everything else around them has become more expensive. Housing inflation pressures renters, healthcare deductibles rise, insurance premiums climb, food costs outpace wage growth. In such an environment, people hunt for savings wherever they can find them, and fuel becomes one of the most visible places to fight for every dollar. But that visibility is deceptive. The sign on the pole tells you what you saved today. It doesn't tell you what you lose tomorrow. I've always taught investors to think in terms of opportunity cost. What is the hidden expense of the decision you're making? What is the thing you're giving up without realizing it? When people choose the cheapest gas station without evaluating the long-term cost of fuel efficiency, they think they're saving money. But the opportunity cost, the hidden price, is often larger than the visible savings. Opportunity cost is one of the most powerful forces in personal finance yet it's almost never discussed in everyday conversation. People think it applies only to Wall Street. In reality, it governs every household budget in America. Every dollar spent unwisely is the dollar that loses its ability to compound. And as someone who built a life on the power of compounding, I can tell you that nothing matters more. When I look at the real effect gas station habits have on families, it's not the fuel cost itself that concerns me. It's the psychological pattern, the tendency to focus on the immediate discount, ignore the long-term cost, and accept subtle inefficiencies as normal. That's the mindset that traps families in cycles of paycheck-to-paycheck living, not because they aren't earning enough, but because they aren't protecting the money they do earn. One of the most important ideas I've ever tried to teach is that wealth is not what you make, it's what you keep. A family earning $50,000 and keeping $5,000 is wealthier than a family earning $300,000 and keeping none of it. Income is not the determinant. Behavior is. Think about that when you pull up to a pump. Think about whether you're acting out of short-term instinct or long-term thinking. Think about whether your decision reinforces a disciplined relationship with money or weakens it, and think about what that relationship will look like in 10 years if you continue making similar decisions across other parts of your life. Your gas station choices reflect something more essential: how you see money, how you respect it, how you defend it, and how consciously you interact with it. And that's why we're here. Not because gas alone determines your financial future, but because the habits built around gas purchases reveal how you handle your entire financial life. When people talk about building wealth, they focus on investing, saving, maximizing returns, and calculating risks. But wealth is also built by plugging the holes in the bucket. If your money leaks out through daily habits, you can invest brilliantly and still end up with very little. That's why I always tell people that defending your wealth is as important as growing it. And when it comes to the subtle leaks created by your gas station choices, there are practical ways to push back, ways that don't require more income, more effort, or more complexity. They only require attention and consistency. I've lived long enough to understand that people don't need another lecture about budgeting or frugality. They need clarity about behavior. They need to understand how small automatic decisions ripple outward into the long-term story of their financial life. That's what this final part is about. I want to show you how ordinary people can reclaim the money they lose at the pump, not through tricks, gimmicks, or extreme behavior, but through disciplined financial thinking. Let me start with the first and most powerful idea. You must recognize that the cheapest price on the pole isn't always the cheapest decision. I know that sounds counterintuitive. We are conditioned to believe that a lower sticker price means savings. But when a decision involves future costs like reduced engine performance or lower fuel efficiency, you can't judge value by the number you see today. You must judge it by the full cost over time. Gasoline is not a single transaction, it's a repeated pattern. If that pattern erodes your car's performance, then every future purchase becomes more expensive. You pay more in the long run for what looked like a deal in the moment. That's why some drivers, especially those who keep their cars for a decade or more, quietly benefit from choosing fuel with more reliable detergent standards. They're not paying for magic fuel. They're paying for fewer deposits and steadier efficiency. A car that stays clean inside the engine is like an employee who stays healthy. You avoid downtime, you avoid repairs, and you avoid unnecessary costs. The goal is not perfection. The goal is minimizing preventable friction. The second powerful idea is understanding your vehicle's actual needs. I've seen families waste hundreds of dollars a year because someone convinced them premium fuel was better, even though the manufacturer clearly stated that regular fuel was acceptable. This is the financial equivalent of drinking bottled water when your tap water is perfectly safe. You're not paying for performance, you're paying for peace of mind that has no basis in fact. One of the simplest ways to defend your wealth is to follow instructions. The engineers who built your car know exactly what fuel it needs. Trust them. The third way people quietly lose money at gas stations is through their payment habits. This is where I've seen the most destructive long-term effects. When someone uses a high-interest credit card for everyday expenses like fuel and then fails to pay the balance in full, the interest becomes a shadow cost attached to every gallon. That interest compounds quietly, invisibly, and mercilessly. If you want to fight back, the simplest financial principle applies. If you use credit, pay it off immediately. Don't let fuel become something you continue to pay for weeks or months later. The moment you let balances roll forward, you convert necessities into liabilities, and liabilities are the enemy of wealth. There's also the issue of psychological spending inside gas station convenience stores. I've studied human behavior long enough to understand how impulse buying works. You just saved a few cents on gas, so you feel like you earned the right to buy a drink or snack. You're standing at the register, already in a spending mindset, and you grab something extra without thinking. Those small purchases compound just as aggressively as interest. If you want to fight back, the solution is simple. Separate fueling from snacking. Treat the gas station the way a surgeon treats an operating room, with focus. You enter for one reason. You leave after accomplishing that one reason. When you do that consistently, you reclaim a surprising amount of money each month. Then there's the long-term maintenance angle. Your vehicle will treat you exactly as well as you treat it. If deposits accumulate, if components wear unevenly, if efficiency drops, your expenses rise slowly and steadily. Fighting back means treating maintenance not as an emergency event, but as preventive care. The same way a doctor advises regular checkups, your car benefits from periodic cleaning, inspections, and tune-ups. These aren't luxuries. They're investments that defend assets. I've always said that preserving capital is the most underrated financial skill in America. People think only about earning more. They rarely think about losing less. Cars are one of the largest expenses for most families. When you maintain them with discipline, you defend one of your biggest assets. Let me tie this together with a broader truth about money. Wealth grows naturally when decisions stop leaking value. You don't need extreme tactics. You don't need to chase financial miracles. You simply need to understand the life cycle of your choices. Gas station habits are reflections of your financial architecture. If you build that architecture on clarity and discipline, wealth becomes a byproduct of stable behavior. I've watched thousands of people over my lifetime, and I've learned that poor financial habits are rarely caused by a lack of intelligence. They're caused by a lack of awareness. Most people never slow down long enough to analyze their own patterns. They don't realize that they've spent $40,000 on gasoline over the life of a car. They don't calculate how many of those dollars were multiplied by credit card interest. They don't see how much was wasted on impulse purchases that felt harmless. But once they see the numbers, everything changes. Awareness creates responsibility. Responsibility creates discipline. Discipline creates stability. I want you to understand something essential. Every dollar saved through efficiency is a dollar that can be invested. And every dollar invested gains the ability to compound. Compounding is the closest thing we have to financial magic. The earlier you feed it, the more it rewards you. But compounding can only work if you stop the leaks first. You cannot fill a bathtub by running the faucet if the drain is wide open. The 5 core principles for stopping those leaks: choosing better fuel when it delivers long-term value, avoiding unnecessary premium purchases, using credit responsibly, eliminating impulse buying, and maintaining your vehicle are not complicated. They're not glamorous. They're not dramatic. But they are effective. The world is full of people chasing complicated solutions because simple ones don't feel powerful enough. But simplicity wins in finance. It has always won. It always will. And let me address one final dimension: time. Wealth is not just measured in money, it is measured in freedom. When you waste money, you are wasting the time you spent earning it. Gas station inefficiencies, credit card interest, unnecessary maintenance costs, these aren't just financial losses. They are hours of your life that evaporate. And when you reclaim those hours by tightening your financial habits, you're not just protecting your wallet, you're protecting your future. When I reflect on my long career, the lesson that stands out most clearly is that the smallest habits often produce the largest outcomes. Investors like Charlie Munger built fortunes not by finding spectacular opportunities, but by avoiding unnecessary mistakes. We used to say, avoiding stupidity is easier than seeking brilliance. That applies perfectly here. You don't need brilliance to save money at the gas pump. You only need to avoid the behaviors that drain your wealth quietly. In the end, controlling your gas station habits is not about becoming obsessive or extreme. It's about adopting a mindset that respects your own money. It's about treating every small financial decision as part of a larger system that determines where your life will be 10 or 20 years from now. When you do that, your financial life becomes less chaotic. Your spending becomes intentional. Your savings grow, and your investments finally have the chance to work the way they're supposed to. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to optimize every dollar. But you do need to understand how everyday decisions shape your trajectory. If you take these ideas seriously, if you pay attention to the long-term cost of your fuel choices, respect your car's needs, eliminate unnecessary premiums, avoid carrying interest, and stop the reflex spending that gas stations are designed to trigger, you put yourself in a stronger financial position than most of the country. In my experience, wealth is built not by extraordinary moves, but by ordinary moves repeated consistently and wisely. Your gas station habits are ordinary moves, but repeated correctly, they can help you save thousands of dollars over a lifetime, and those thousands invested for decades can become something meaningful, something that gives you options, security, opportunity, and peace. If you want to change your financial future, start with the decisions you make every week. Start with the habits you barely notice. Start with the pump in front of you, because the choices you make there aren't small. They are the foundation of a wealth-building mindset. And once you master that mindset, everything else becomes easier.